Okay. So I see we are Facebook living, and we have all of our speakers here. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kyle Duff. I am a current seminary student from the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, but serving here at First Immanuel Lutheran Church. And this event is part of a series that we've been calling Civil Rights Then and Now. This is our third event, which is focused on exploring First Immanuel's rich history of both racial integration and civil rights activism, and also learning together about what it might mean to be a congregation concerned about civil rights today. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Those who stayed after worship from First Immanuel, those who have joined our Zoom space, those that will be watching on Facebook Live, either live now or later. If you are new to the First Immanuel community, please feel free to visit our website to find out some more information. And that is at www.firstimmanuelchicago.org. And I'm putting it here in the chat now for everyone. So please feel free to join us for our ministries as we move forward and continue to worship and serve God and follow our call. So as I said, this is our third event in this series, Civil Rights Then and Now. We began in February with a panel discussion that was exploring some of the wonderful history that First Immanuel has as a community, especially regarding racial integration and some civil rights activism between the 1950s and 1970s or so, focused on some housing discrimination and even holding Martin Luther King Jr. Speaking here at the church. And at our last event in March, we were able to have a guest speaker, Miss Beverly Jones from Lutheran Child and Family Services of Illinois, who talked about their journey of and current work in dismantling institutional racism and what that meant for them in a faith-based social servants agency context. And so here for this event today, we're taking another approach, looking at this from another angle to explore what civil rights means in the world today, especially in the congregational context, a Christian church congregation community. And so we have a really special opportunity today to hear from not just one, but two different Congregational Antiracism Ministries from sibling churches in the Metro Chicago Synod of the ELCA. And so we have representatives today from St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Logan Square, and that is in Yvonne Perez and Grant Griffin. If you all both want to wave your hands, if you could, thank you so much. And when we get to the time of sharing, we're going to spotlight you so everyone can see you very clearly. And then also we have from Holy Trinity, who has campuses in both the Loop and in Lakeview. We have Pastor Ben Adams and Carrie Fleming who are with us. If you're able to maybe wave your hands as well for people to get an introduction to you here. And so thank you again all so much for being here. They've agreed to shed some light on how their teams came into being, what their journeys looked like, and what the work of anti-racism looks like in a congregational context in their own particular church communities. And so we'll hear from them in just a moment. Before we do that, I have a few quick logistical notes, just so everyone is aware. This event is being recorded at the moment. It is also on Facebook Live. So please just be aware of that as we continue. And for those that may want to watch this later, it will be also posted on the First Immanuel website for access to view at another time. Another Zoom etiquette, if you are not one of our speakers today, I just ask that you keep your microphone on mute until we get to the question and answer period. Also, when we get to some Q&A, I'm going to be putting a survey in the chat. I really would love to hear your feedback on this event, and particularly if you're a First Immanuel member as well, your thoughts on how this influences the possibility of First Immanuel's ministry moving forward. So there's some questions there, so a survey to come up. And as I noted, there's a little contingency with Pastor Harry likely when we get to the Q&A. So he's going to be our go-between between the online space and an in-person space. So just for everyone to be aware of that, if you're seeing multiple people show up in a little logistical maneuvering. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to that box. Pastor Harry is going to open us up in prayer for today. So Pastor Harry. the beauties of an online space. There we go.
Seem to take a moment here to, can you hear me? Yes, okay. I think because I've got the big screen plugged into my computer, it's dragging things, slowing things down. Hope everybody can hear me. So good to have everybody here and have you with us. Invite you to pray. The Lord be with you. And let us pray. Most wonderful and gracious God, you have made your creation in rich variety, and we thank you for the wonder of that creation. Help us, Lord, to appreciate all your creation, to be good stewards of the larger creation, and in this conversation, to be wonderful siblings with one another as your creation, as the crown of your creation, as human beings with souls and lives in rich variety. In our conversation now, may we be guided by your Holy Spirit to see one another with your eyes, to see with love, and to see how we might be instruments of healing, of justice, of equity, and of your vision for all creation. Bless us now. We offer that to you in the name of him who offered himself for us, Jesus our Savior. Amen, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Harry. I really appreciate you setting our minds on our work together today. And so now I want to turn it over to our speakers. First, I just want to ask if all four of you would give just a brief introduction about who you are, which worshiping community you're coming from, and anything else pertinent that you want to share with us, with your family or your identity with the church, even your work with anti-racism in the past. And then once we share those introductions, we did not decide who wants to go first. So if anyone has a strong passion to want to get going, feel free to say, my team wants to go first as you make some introductions. So I'll pass it off to anyone who would like to share first.
All right, I guess I'll go first. Good afternoon. I had to look at the clock, see what time it is. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ivan Perez. I am a member of St. Luke's of Logan Square. And you just wanted some background. So I also serve on the Synodical Anti-Racism team in Other Pebble. In terms of this work, I've been involved in or around anti-racism work for the majority of my life. Formally, for the past 25 plus years. I'm both the synodical team and I'm also on the leadership team for CROR, Chicago Regional Organizing for Anti-Racism. So I've been taking a bunch of different approaches to this work. And I'm sure I'll share more throughout the talk. So I'll stop there and then hand off to Grant. Oh, before I hand off to Grant, I guess I should say something besides my anti-racism work. This is what I do when I'm not doing what pays the bills. Professionally, I am a technology project manager for a bank. I also am a father of one, of Nico, and spouse of Vicky. I was born and spent part of my life in Puerto Rico, but I've lived the majority of my life in Chicago. So I like to describe myself, you may have heard people talking about being on the hyphen. I am most definitely living on the hyphen between the Puerto Rican world and the US world, and I'm neither in one or the other. I'm somewhere in the middle, blended between both. My household, we speak Spanish. Outside of my household, we speak English. So that's a little bit about me. All right, Grant.
Grant, you're still on mute right now. I still can't hear you at the moment.
There we go.
There we go.
Wasn't letting me unmute. Hi, yeah, I'm Grant. Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for that terrific introduction and sort of setting the context. So yeah, I'm a member of St. Luke's Lutheran Church Logan Square. I have been, especially relative to Yvonne, I have been doing this work for far less time. But yeah, I guess it started with a CBOR workshop, 2.5-day workshop, I think around maybe the 2015, 2016 timeframe. And then I joined another Pebble, the Synodical Antiracism Ministry. And then, yeah, proceeded to sort of bring that back to St. Luke's. And let's see, otherwise, I guess on a day-to-day basis, I work in regulatory affairs in biotechnology, and married to beautiful Black woman, Serena. She, I think, was a pivotal person in getting me to encouraging me to do more. I think from my standpoint, I was in sort of a place where I wanted to do more within the church, but wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like. And I think especially thinking about her, my family, my son, 5 years, Aiden, who's about to turn 6 actually. I think just kind of started me on a journey to, I guess, to really, understand the world around me. And I think the racism that has existed for so long. So yeah, so I guess with that, there'll be more to share, but I pass it on to Carrie.
Thanks, Grant. I appreciate it. And Kyle, thanks for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here, sharing all this with everybody, and definitely listening and hoping to learn what everyone else is up to and doing as well. I'm a longtime member of Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in not Andersonville, Lakeview, Andersonville, Lakeview. Like I said, longtime member, so I should know where it is. I too have been doing anti-racism work for a good part of my life in a variety of different areas and organizations. I did the 2.5-day a long time ago. I don't remember exactly when. So I've been in and out of the anti-racism work at Holy Trinity. I shouldn't say in and out, more involved, less involved, in, pull back, and really ramped up my my participation a couple years ago when we as a church signed on to the Synod Anti-Racism Covenant, and I really jumped in with both feet then, because I saw this unique opportunity to really kick ourselves in the butt and get going with doing some dismantling of institutional racism. I also do this work in organizations right now, such as the Lighthouse Foundation in Chicago, which is an intersectional organization that deals with not only racism, but also LGBTQ queer rights for Black folks. So it meshes the two together, and it's a perfect fulcrum point for me. And also with One North Side, where we've just begun a brand new squad, we're calling it, to look at that whole organization and dismantle all the racism that manifests itself in there. So that's a new, I've been with them for a long time, but it's a new thing that we're doing. It's brave of them to be looking at this in that kind of organization. I think every organization in the country should be doing it. I'm happy to be involved in what they're doing. And I'll talk more about Holy Trinity a little later on. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Pastor Ben.
Thank you, Carrie. My name is Pastor Ben Adams, and many people at First Immanuel would probably know me as I've been there to preach and preside, given that I also serve in a half-time role with the South Loop Campus Ministry. So great to see you all again, and great to be here. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I've been at Holy Trinity now for 6 years and been involved with Antiracism Ministries since the beginning. And it was a ministry that actually preceded me. I did not bring this to Holy Trinity. The Antiracism Ministry has been going probably for over 15 years now at Holy Trinity, because it started about a decade before I even got there as an associate pastor. So I've been blessed to kind of inherit some of the leadership that has been passed on. And we also have a few more leaders with us from our ministry here today that I just want to highlight. We have John Flowers, who has valiantly led us for the past several years. And we've now newly installed a new leadership team, and a few of those folks are with us. Susan Boyne is here, I can see, as well as Jamie Johnson. And so I just wanted to make sure those folks also knew that if there's anything you'd like to add to our story that Carrie and I are bringing, feel free to kind of jump in there and add your voice to anything we might miss.
Awesome, and thank you, Pastor Ben. When we get to that point, please let me know if I can also add those members into kind of our pinned videos, and if they want to be part of the sharing too. More than happy to. We'll take all the voices and information as we can get today. I did not hear anyone say, we really want to go first. So is there a team that is feeling more passionate one way or another? All right, well then, as St. Lucan got us kicked off for our introductions, I would invite you as well to start. We did have, I'm hoping maybe 25, 30 minutes. You can do shorter than that, as much as you want, but just to keep us tracked on time. I could sit here and listen to you talk all day, but just for our time limit, we'll maybe try to keep it to that. But I don't want to stop the Holy Spirit from flowing in our conversation either, and doing some good work. So, but I will invite you, Yvonne and Grant, to give us started with hearing about St. Luke's journey with their anti-racism ministry team.
Yeah, we just say be careful what you wish for, because some of us are talkers. So granting I'm just going to jump in.
Yes.
So granting I didn't put together any kind of formal thing. We're just going to give you a walk through our stream of consciousness of what's going on at St. Luke's and probably beyond. Before we get started, I do want to share that I also have been working with Holy Trinity, so there's a little bit of a tie there that we can talk about at some point, because I think it'll feed into some of the questions that you're bringing today in terms of doing congregational work that we can talk to. So in terms of anti-racism work at St. Luke's, it hasn't been around that long formally, probably just under 2 years in a formal setting. That's back in 2019 is when we took this to the pastor and then to the council and said, we think we should be doing anti-racism work at St. Luke's. And given the fact that both Grant and I served on the synodical team, we kind of felt that if our own congregation wasn't doing it, we kind of weren't doing our work, So we took that to the congregation, and we said we need to get this work going. We went through a bunch of steps. We went through a discernment step first of really just talking with the pastor for a while, just trying to figure out what does this mean for St. Luke's? What are we really trying to accomplish? We talked to some other leaders, did some stakeholder conversation kind of thing, informal, just trying to figure out where people were at before we took it into a formal direction. I do want to preface that we also felt that St. Luke's was a really good location to do this kind of work, because St. Luke's has a long history of doing social justice kind of work, primarily around the LGBTQ community, but also housing discrimination and food insecurity and some other areas. So and even into incarceration. So we felt, given the history of St. Luke's, this was just the next natural step in the work of St. Luke's. As I said, we just had that conversation, and we just started talking through what it meant to do this at St. Luke's. I don't know, Grant, you want to add anything else? I can keep going down that road.
Yeah. I was just kind of looking back over the past few days just to remind myself of, sort of that initial journey and the timeline. And I think it was like October 2018 when we first had a conversation. And then I think that following January, we had sort of an informal conversation with Pastor Aaron. And I think it was June 2019 that we first started you know, meeting as a small group for, you know, what would become the ministry. And that was actually a couple of months prior to when we did a large kickoff, I think in August of that year as part of worship, to sort of mark the moment of starting this ministry. So it did it did take, you know, a certain amount of time to kind of get all those activities started. And then I think after that point, you know, there was a lot of, as Yvonne said, a lot of discernment. We kind of tried to understand what everyone's individual reasons for wanting to be a part of this work were. And we talked about and we went through some ground rules for you know, when we had discussions to create a brave space that way. We defined different stakeholders that would be impacted, and I think, you know, then generally we kind of went into a you know, what I think is still happening, you know, kind of a routine gathering in which we could do analysis and do you know, basically read books, poetry. We did a watch party at one point, basically just having lots of discussions and sort of self-analysis to really look at the ways in which, you know, racism is operating that way.
So a couple of things I want to add to what Grant just said is, you'll hear us refer to ourselves a lot as a ministry, and you'll hear Holy Trinity do the same thing. That's very intentional. When we started this work at St. Luke's, we brought it to the congregation and said, this has to be a ministry of the congregation. This is not a committee. This is not a work force, a task force, or whatever you want to call it. This is not something that's just going to be here and then go away. It's a ministry of the congregation. And the other key piece of that, not just a ministry, it's a ministry of the congregation. So it's not this small group of people who are going to go off into some room and do anti-racism. The job of this core group is to really provide leadership and push the congregation forward in this work. But it's truly the work of the entire congregation, not just the few of us that are on the core group. And we've been talking about what that means recently. And part of what we're talking about is that our job is not to be necessarily the face of anti-racism, even though we are for now. Our job eventually is to permeate everything that St. Luke's does, whether it be children's ministry or women's ministry or housing or poverty, whatever St. Luke's is working on. We want to get it to the point where the lens that we're helping to create informs everything that's done across the congregation. So that when something's happening, you don't have to come tap me on the shoulder and say, well, does this work from an anti-racism perspective? You should be doing that already as part of your discernment for whatever work you're doing. And that's how we're seeing our work, is to help inform the larger body of the congregation so that they can do their work through an anti-racist lens. The other piece, when we talked about stakeholders, it wasn't just internal stakeholders. We actually sat down and came up with a list of internal and external. What folks outside of our congregation, what organizations outside of our congregation are impacted or interact with us on a daily basis that we need to make sure are on board with us working this way. And what that means, for example, is when we were looking to move into our new facility, a large part of the conversation was around those kind of values. Do our partners share those values? The way that we're using our space, is it informed by anti-racist values? Are we being good community stewards? So all of that conversation happened because we're trying to make sure that this thinking is part of who we are at St. Luke's. It's not just something that we do on Sunday mornings and then go away. I know part of the question that you had asked, Kyle, was in terms of the journey. Grant kind of laid out some of the items that we've done. The way we're looking at this journey is exactly that. It is a journey. we're trying not to be too prescriptive. We're trying to really lay out kind of a loose framework for folks to meet us where they're at. And what that means is that there are some folks who've been doing this for a very long time, and there are folks who never even thought about this, and all of those are okay. We just want to give them space to connect in where they're comfortable connecting. So that means also that we meet monthly with our pastor to lay out an agenda of sorts, a very loose agenda just for our gatherings. And what we're trying to do is we've been trying to tie that into the overall life of the congregation. So the liturgical calendar and whatever the pastoral staff comes up with in terms of the themes that they want to cover, we're trying to tie into those themes so that the congregation gets a complete picture and it doesn't look like it's just this offshoot off doing its own thing. That also means that we've been very flexible and have changed things sometimes on the fly. For example, right where we were getting into our rhythm of our monthly gatherings, COVID happened. So we had to adjust. For the first, I don't know, 2 or 3 months of everybody being home, we were meeting bi-weekly. And that's when we started changing it from calling them meetings, because we don't really do a lot of business in our meetings. We started calling them gatherings because they are truly moments for us to come together as a group and do some kind of analysis work. So for example, we just had one last week, and we spent some time just talking about news. What's going on in the news? We talked about the stuff going up in Minneapolis. We talked about some other things, and then just trying to figure out from an analytical perspective, what is our point of view? Where do we see the equity or the inequity in the situation? Where do we see points for us to actually use as a jumping off point to do more congregational work or community work? So we just spent an hour just going through those kind of things, that kind of conversation, as a way to deepen the knowledge and bring that further into the conversation at St. Luke's. So that's the kind of work we've been doing. I don't know, Grant.
Yeah, I was just, something else that came to mind. I think so at about the year anniversary point. So let's say about September of last year, we kind of took a step back and tried to look at what we thought was working, and maybe what was not working as well. And I think the one thing we really realized was that doing this kind of analysis was really key and instrumental. But the one thing that we decided to add was to start. We started several working groups. One, and actually, entities again that aren't exclusive to anti-racism ministry, but by which that lens is really critical. So we had one for sort of revisiting our welcome statement, and one for land acknowledgement, and one in which we kind of looked at the history of the Lutheran Church and that relationship with racism and perpetuating racism. And and I think, and it seems like having those sort of working groups really allowed people to people in our congregation that were excited about various aspects about what we were doing, to really go off and work on that. And and still with our monthly gatherings, we still have an opportunity then to have time for them to come back and talk about basically raise any questions or concerns that they have based on what they've been doing outside of the meetings. And it's really been an opportunity for all of us to talk about all of those things together as well.
And these are short-term working groups, by the way. We're not looking to have some big monolith that we create and it's there for the rest of life. So for example, the land acknowledgement group, they got together, they went and did their work. They met with some of the indigenous groups in the area. And they came back with a proposal, and we're already using the land acknowledgement piece as part of our worship experience. It's already been implemented. So that only from start to finish, that might have been 2 months, I think. So we try to move through that fairly quickly, and it's iterative. We'll adjust as we learn new things. The same thing with the welcome group. The welcome group actually got started over a year ago, but then when everything started locking down, it kind of shut down. It got restarted again this fall, and we already have a new welcome statement that's been created. We haven't started using it because we're not in our space yet. But we do have a new welcome statement that was created that is vastly different than what we had before. It acknowledges some of what happened before at St. Luke's while bringing in new sensibilities and new understandings. And then in terms of other things we're doing, in the month of March, in order to celebrate Women's History Month, we asked everybody to bring a friend to the table. And by that, what we mean is bring a woman from history or not, who they felt was important in their formation to do anti-racism or justice work. So everybody brought a person or a couple of persons. And when I say bring, I mean virtually bring, because some folks lived over 100 years ago. And they brought that person into the conversation. And why is this person important to me? And why is this woman, or in our case, we said women or femmes, because we didn't want to be exclusionary in terms of gender. What is it about this person that informed the work that I do today, and it's key to me? And I think it was a very valuable conversation for a lot of folks. There were some names that people had never heard of, and the names weren't really the key. It was the conversation around the people and why it was important. And that's the kind of thing we've been trying to do from a monthly perspective. We've done Women's History Month. We did the other way that we look to involve people outside of our anti-racism ministry is, for example, we did 1 month we did something about environmental justice. So we found a couple of people in the congregation who had some knowledge in that area and just asked them to come in. We did a piece around there was a justice piece around reparations, and there was one member of our congregation who had expressed a deep interest in it. So we asked her to actually do the opening reflection. She hadn't been participating in our monthly gatherings, but for that we came and she presented, and it was very good to see outside perspectives, not just the same group that's always gathering. So that's the way we're trying to spread wealth throughout the congregation.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Grant.
Nope, I didn't have anything. I saw maybe Kyle was going to ask something.
I didn't want to cut you off. And just to give just a little perspective, I failed to do this for the entire group a moment as we were getting started. We will have a time for some questions and answers at the end, and I'm going to try to gather some of those questions if you put them in the chat as we go along. Right after they're done presenting, we're going to have a couple people from our team, my Civil Rights That I Now team, ask some questions. And I'm also going to have, before we open it up for everybody, allow both the St. Luke's and the Holy Trinity team to do any back and forth that they want to do. But I wanted to key in while you are still talking here, Yvonne and Grant. Just one thing that you noted about the work of St. Luke's is, I think maybe a common misconception when I'm envisioning this at least, is that, oh, this means when we talk about anti-racism work for a church, we're going to go be racial justice warriors, and that we're just protesting on the streets and doing things out in the public. But what I'm hearing is that this is actually very internal work within the congregation, trying to see how racism, how structural white supremacy is playing out within your own congregation. Can you maybe talk about some of that distinction there?
Yeah, so for me, it's a both and kind of thing, Kyle. And all these folks here from Ben and Carrie and others have heard me talk about this a bunch. When people want to do anti-racism work, the initial instinct is to want to go do action. Everybody wants to jump into action, and I'm okay with that. Go do action, but I also want people to take a step back and do some discernment about why they want to do that action and what is it that action is accomplishing and who is it impacting. Because frequently, in my experience, we'll see a lot of people who are very very much involved in racial justice, for example, who can do some work or some action without some thinking in advance of the outcomes, and they actually end up causing more damage than what they help. So I'm not telling people don't do the action. I'm just telling you do it in a thoughtful way. Um, so you think about it in advance. The other piece for me, and this is me, this is not St. Luke's or anybody else, is that um, I think anti-racism work has many facets. The action is definitely one part of it, but the one that people don't do as much because it's not as fun is the discernment piece, what we call the work. So doing your own analysis, doing some self-analysis, doing analysis of your congregation, doing analysis of your community. People tend to not do as much of that because it's not as fun. And also because it brings in some heavy questions that a lot of times people don't want to grapple with, or it can cause some issues. What I frequently tell folks when I'm doing workshops, it's, it's to grapple with this stuff. You're not going to know it today. It took 500 years to set up the system. You're not going to fix it overnight. Just struggle with it. The struggle is part of the journey. And you're going to know all the answers on day one. You might not know all the answers ever. It's like, and that's okay. That's just part of doing this work. But it's the effort that's involved in doing it. You hear people sometimes throw out the phrase, the journey is the important thing. Well, guess what? The journey is the important thing. It sounds trite, and sometimes it is. But when you're doing anti-racism work, from my perspective, that's how you get the work done, because it's incremental as you start learning more things about yourself and about the work. And I give the example of myself. I've been doing this for a very long time, and every time I do a new workshop or a new event, I learn something new. I'm always adapting and evolving in terms of how I think about things. So it's an ongoing kind of process. I have a couple answers to folks online, but I'll let Grant answer this first. And
Yeah, no, that's good. I think I kind of think similarly. I think to me, it is both of those things. I think it is the analysis, and the action. And I think that idea kind of underscores the importance of, as a congregation, having that discernment and really understanding, what it is that, we're setting out to do. Because I think, at times I think there has been, disagreement or different opinions that way in terms of, what we should be spending our time doing. And I think that's all good to kind of discuss together. And I think it's a really, really valid point. And I think, all of this kind of also makes me think about, I saw one of the questions was sort of about how you define anti-racism. And I think, in terms of that journey, I think to me, I think it is really this sort of proactive, ongoing commitment, sort of to what Yvonne was saying. I think to look at, both the systemic aspect of it, but then also to look inwardly, to look internally, and to reflect on in a personal way as well, and to develop a constructive, racial identity for for each person. So yeah, I think, just kind of made me think about that.
So actually, and Grant just reminded me of something that I've used before. But when we talk about being anti-racist, because frequently people say, why do you use this negative term anti-racist? Why can't you say I'm not racist, or why can't you say something else? And it's very intentional. As Grant said, being anti-racist speaks to the intentionality of the work. It means that you're intentionally seeking out to reverse something, to undo something. And I have I'm going to read this one because I don't want to screw this definition up, but this is the definition that I've used before. Being anti-racist is indicative of a process of coming to a healthy and functioning sense of a white racial identity. Because I've had people say, well, why are you trying to tear us down? And I'm saying, that's not the point. The point is to understand the structures and the systems that have been put in place, and how all this stuff manifests, and how it, one of the things that I'm always trying to remind folks is that, yes, it impacts me as a person of color, but it doesn't just impact me. It also impacts folks in the white community. So it's a relational kind of thing. So we're very intentional about this. And when I say about action, I'm not, going on a march isn't action, but there are other actions. Doing a more welcoming state, that's an action. People don't always see it as an action, but it is. It's the first thing people see when they come to your congregation and they open up the program in the morning, on Sunday morning. If I can address, because I see somebody put in a chat, what is a land acknowledgement group? And I'll do that briefly. Land acknowledgement is when, in our case, when us as a congregation, we are acknowledging that the land that St. Luke sits on, the land that Chicago sits on, the land where I live, I was not there first. There were living these lands when the colonizers came in and took over the land. So land acknowledgement seeks to understand what is the history and the trajectory of this piece of land we called home. Who has been living there over time, who has been impacted, who has been removed or moved forcefully or not. How do we get to be here? So that kind of thing, so that we can be more conscious of the fact that we are living on the goods of somebody else established. It was not something that we necessarily created, but we are profiting off of it, whether just by being able to live there, or in some cases actually profiting financially. Somebody I think asked, how do we get that going? At St. Luke's, we actually had a couple of people who kicked it off. And as part of what they did is, aside from talking to various people in the congregation about what we wanted to acknowledge, they also went to the Indian American Center, and they actually met with community leaders in that community and talked to them about the desire to do some kind of acknowledgement and what would be the best way to do that. And what they came back with was a framework of how to properly acknowledge the first peoples on this land, and actually not just how to do it, but who were the first peoples on land. So now, for example, when we start worship at St. Luke's, we have a land acknowledgement piece that we've created, and it calls out by name the actual First Nations that were here hundreds of years ago, on this piece of land, and that's part of that conversation. So that's the way we did the land acknowledgement at St. Luke's. That's not the only way, but that's the way we did it.
Thank you both so much. Is there anything else you want to say before we maybe transition to Holy Trinity and Q&As before I move on? This has been absolutely wonderful. I've taken a lot of notes already. But anything else you want to add before we transition?
I do want to add one other piece, because I want to remind folks, when we do anti-racism work, it's not always the easiest topic to do. And it's not all roses. We might be painting things that are going really well. There's also some things that don't always go as we would like. Grant and I were talking the other day about, if we went to our congregation and we asked folks, has there been any resistance? We think probably most people would say, no, there hasn't been any resistance. But we disagree with that. Resistance isn't always visible. It's not always vocal. But there's definitely resistance. And some people, I think, resist and they don't realize they're resisting. So just to bring that up, that it's got both sides. The other piece that I always try to remind myself is that if you enter into this kind of work congregationally, the congregation has to be prepared for change. There will be change in the way the congregation thinks. There might be change in people who decide they no longer want to be part of your congregation. And that's okay. I think that's all part of the journey. because if people are not ready to be part of this work and they want to leave, I think to welcome them to go find a different experience, you will always find that other folks will come in who might not have come in before. But that's part of the journey. And that's part of what the congregation has to be ready for. There will be change.
Yeah, yeah, and I would just add, I think, what I've learned is that I think there has to be, there has to be a certain amount of discomfort, I think, at times for you to know that you're, that you're fully engaging in this work. And I think, as part of the journey, I don't, personally, I don't consider myself some sort of expert or anything, but I think, it's been really, I just kind of go back to that idea of leaning into this as a lifelong commitment and to continue to learn from others and just sort of permeate the congregation, I think, for others to do the same.
Wonderful. Thank you for those reflections very much. I think at this point in time, we'll probably start to transition over to Holy Trinity. As I'm doing that, though, I have realized that I have drastically underbooked the amount of time that we probably should have saved for this space. But I also want to acknowledge that I've only asked you to commit to a certain amount of time. And so I'm just curious if, should we say we could wrap up around 1:45 or 2 o'clock if you have capacity and willingness to do that. And if not, that is 100% acceptable. You only agreed on to a certain amount of time. But I just wanted to ask about that for the sake of our kind of guests here and for myself as well.
Yeah,
I'm good. Yeah.
That should be good.
Excuse me, will this be available online so that those that might not be able to stay for the second part can see it?
Yes, absolutely. We are recording this and it will be available on the First Immanuel website probably over the course of this week or on Facebook, our First Immanuel Chicago Facebook page. You should be able to watch the event very shortly after it's done.
Thank you.
So thank you. And then Pastor Ben and Carrie, how was your timing looking?
I'm good.
I should be able to stick around.
Okay, and this is an honest statement. If you need to leave, please leave. Take the time you need to. But thank you all for your graciousness in that. And I will then turn it over to you, Pastor Ben and Carrie from Holy Trinity. And let me know if I can also tab up anyone else to be the spotlight with your team.
Well, I'm not sure if they want to be spotlighted, but I might ask, like, at one point if John or Susan or Jamie wants to hop in and add their voice to it, they can. Carrie, if you don't mind, I'll just maybe say a little bit about our history, even though I wasn't here for much of it. It preceded me, but what I did want to say is that Holy Trinity has been doing anti-racism work, like I said, for the better part of about 15 years now. And that work has taken on many different focuses and priorities and shifts and balances in terms of leadership of it. We are now in this stage where we are in a covenant with the Synod team, and we are also in partnership now with other congregations because of that covenant, other congregations in our Synod that are doing this work. So we just want to say first that, like, we have been so blessed by being able to learn from St. Luke's, right? Like, we've been doing this work for a long time, but we've learned so much just in this past 2 years of ways in which we can use language, especially to make our ministry more inclusive and more inviting to newcomers. Because what we noticed over the course of years that we've been doing this work is that it became kind of like a core group, right, that was doing this work, and it was kind of insular, and it wasn't necessarily like permeating into the wider congregation. And when we first started this work, right when it began, there was a real big emphasis on getting people to training, to the 2.5-day workshops that are put on by CROAR, the Chicago Regional Organizing for Anti-Racism. And so we were getting people to those trainings in order to build like a common vocabulary, a common language at Holy Trinity, so that we were speaking about racism on the same terms. We weren't just, talking about it as an individual's, outburst or something like that, but that it's actually something that is kind of intertwined into our systems, in our country's systems, in our church's systems even, and in ourselves. And so realizing that we are a part of this, and it's not just something that happens if we say the wrong thing or if we think the wrong thing, but it's actually a part of what happens even when we're not aware of it. And so building up that common language was important, but we kind of hit a plateau. And then we went through a few years, I would say, of leadership changes. We had one of our more important leaders, who was our organizer and our convener, move away. And so our ministry was kind of sputtering for a little while. And it was when the Synod team came to us to really talk about this 2-year covenant that we really got back in gear in a more significant way. And so I will say that this past year and a half, really, since we've been doing this covenant work, has been maybe some of the most generative time in our anti-racism ministry in a long time. And what we've done is we focused on 3 different areas in our ministry. So we have a team that's looking at our history as a church and as a city. So really trying to dive into that and root ourselves in a historical lens that oftentimes doesn't get talked about or taught. And so bringing some of those things into perspective for us. We also have an audit team who's looking at our, first of all, looking at our welcome statement, which we've also just newly drafted a welcome statement that's different and much more inclusive. And so we're really happy with that. We're going to be auditing some governing documents and moving on from there to looking at other ways in which we talk about ourselves or organize ourselves as a church, making sure that those things are from the perspective of an anti-racist lens. And then the third part has been to conduct a survey of our church, which we have now completed. We are in the process now of analyzing all of that data. And at first we were thinking, oh, this is, a survey that we can do in-house and really just kind of like pull it apart in our own way. But we realized that not all of us have that type of expertise. And so the most recent thing that we've been able to do is reach out to a data analyst from the University of Chicago to take that data and do some analyzing of it that goes beyond our abilities and expertises, to see if there's any other layers to this data that we might be able to pull out and see about where we're at as a congregation, to really get a wider net of perspectives rather than really just the 20 or so folks that come to our meetings on the monthly basis that we have them. But we've been much more consistent as of late in this work and really much more committed to it. And I'll leave it over to Kerry now to say a little bit more about his perspective of how the work has changed and evolved over time.
Thanks, Ben. Well, in terms of the history, if we want to look at that, I don't want to call anybody out if they're not interested, but I would invite John Blowers to speak a little bit about that, because he's been around a lot longer, been more deeply entrenched. I think he knows more about the history specifics than I do. So if John would like to jump on and speak about that, I would appreciate it. Yeah, it's been up and down, and I said that my involvement has been kind of in and out, and some of that was due to frustration that we stalled, like Ben said. We were committed to it. We got going. Things changed. Wasn't going. People would come to meetings. They would get frustrated. Nothing's happening. I don't know what to do. I'm going to leave. Yes, the covenant, as I mentioned at the beginning, was a real goose, not only for the ministry group, but indeed the congregation. The congregation signed on to it, not this group. So it is, as Yvonne was saying, this is a congregational effort, a congregational commitment. That being said, that's not sunshine and roses all the time either. We do have folks who are saying, well, we're all good. We're progressive liberal church. Why do we need to do this? We're all good. We don't have this problem. So, that's a lack of awareness and lack of willingness to do anything about it. And if you don't acknowledge the problem, you can't work towards a solution. We have that in our congregation. That's one of the things that we're trying to work toward. And in doing that, it's much more important that we bring as much of our work, the ministry work, into the congregation as a whole. We do that by having specific forums that we do after worship on Sundays, where we bring specific topics and discuss them. The welcome statement is one of them. We had a small group that was working on that, as Ben was talking about. We felt that that piece was the most important piece to start with. It's not a prescriptive thing. You know, our pastors speak to their welcome statement in each worship service, and each one of them, we have 3, speak it a little bit differently. And we even bringing the new one forward and wanting it to be somewhat codified. We're not being prescriptive to the pastor to say you must say this way. We want it to be somewhat fluid. We want it to be a living thing. We want it to evolve and change as is necessary, because that's how it becomes more inclusive and more up to date. It has to be a living thing. It can't be static. But we have employed it, and the pastors have begun to think more about what their words are and incorporate that. We've also incorporated more of this work into the worship services. I think my experience, I think probably almost every sermon that we have now, every Sunday, this work is brought into that sermon some kind of way. So it's always at the forefront of being delivered to the congregation in one form or another. So we have forums that we do. And we also have people who may never come to a meeting at all, who wouldn't even say I'm part of the ministry, but they contribute. We have, for example, there's one of our members who has done a lot of this kind of work in her life. And the way she contributes is that she curates a lot of articles and pulls a lot of different things from the news and that kind of thing, and about anti-racism and what's going on. It could be the Chauvin trial, whatever. And she sends out a newsletter that has all the links, has all the information, so that you go right to it. There's her digest and you just punch into it. That's a tremendous contribution. And it, as Yvonne was saying, that's a different kind of action, but it is action, right?
But
It's
you're
not.
underselling her. You're underselling her, Carrie. She does a lot of work.
No, I'm not underselling her. I just pointed this piece out. I know she does a great deal of work. I'm just saying people think of what you were saying, Yvonne, the idea of that it's just this little group off in a corner that does it. That's not true. There are a lot of people who do much more. She's a prime example. She's giving us this piece. She never comes to a meeting. She doesn't have to. She's still doing the work, and it helps us do the analysis. It helps us look at who we are, helps us look at ourselves in relation to the into the world and to our community. It's extremely important work. I don't mean to sell her short at all. She doesn't deserve that, and I'm not doing that. It's just another way that people contribute without being in the group. We do have the perception in our congregation that, oh yeah, there's this group off to the side doing that. We don't need to deal with it. They're doing it. That's something that's one of the structures that we're attempting to change by making it more known and more inclusive, that it is a congregational thing. It's not a group thing. Worship too, looking at how hymns are chosen, how the lectionary is formulated, and even into the structure of the church, how hiring is done, and that type of thing. We're looking at all of those institutional things, and changes in those areas have already begun to be made. So steps forward, not always easy. We do get pushback. We too did, for the whole month of February, a series of conversations on reparations, both at the Loop location and at the Lakeview location. So it ended up being like 5 conversations that we were doing. And as Yvonne was saying, resistance. And we did get verbal resistance from some of it. People were saying, you should not be doing this at all. Now, was it the entire congregation rising up revolt? No, but those voices are there. There are people that don't like that we're spending so much time doing it, don't think we need to be spending time doing this. And specifically with something like reparations, don't want to hear about it and don't want us even bringing it there. So it's not all sunshine and roses. The whole point is that, as was said before, this is a commitment. If you want to talk action, the biggest action that we could do as anti-racism is commit to doing the work, as Vaughn was saying. That's the biggest action we can do. And that's an ongoing thing, and it's a slow process, but we're making some steps forward. And it's just a matter of keeping it going. Ben was saying it has been a bit more focused in the last couple of years. We have, formed side committees that actually do a lot of the work. We also don't do a great deal of work in our monthly meeting. It's like reports or whatever, or we talk about specific topics sometimes. If Yvonne was saying we do that too. Oh, and by the way, in terms of not selling people short, Yvonne has had a lot of help and doing what is happening at Holy Trinity. He's been a great resource. He's been a great aid, been a great person for us to go to. He's been a great help to it. And so, our work, what we're doing now also depends upon what Yvonne has done and what he's brought to us too. So that partnership is incredibly important too. And I don't want to minimize that either. So again, I'm going to wind down now because I'm going to start rambling, but all of these things are important measures that we're doing. And the last thing I'll say, Yvonne was talking about not having all the answers. None of us has all the answers. If we did, we would have fixed this whole problem and we wouldn't be here today, and none of us would have to be doing this work because it had been done. I think it's important to remember that we don't always even have all the right questions. And that's okay too. That's part of the uncomfortableness of it. The important part is to commit to doing something, to doing the work, showing up, to continue doing it and make that commitment. And we do. It's okay that we're going to make mistakes. It's okay that we fall on our face. Sometimes it's okay that we look at our meetings and say, what are we doing? We don't seem to have any shape or form or organization. It's okay, because that's part of the analysis. We continue to look at ourselves. We continue to look at ourselves individually. We continue to look at ourselves in terms of the ministry. How can we move forward? How can we evolve? How can we change this to make it better? How can we move forward in a different way? We continue to do that. That analysis is extremely important, and that's what's going to help us stay together and continue to move forward.
I'm willing. Ben, did you have anything just then? I could add just a couple of. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for inviting us to this conversation. Ben, I crack up when you say that this preceded you, because we did call a pastor who is an activist and an organizer, as well as being a pastor, and he has been there for every moment of every part of this journey that we've been on since he got here, and so that has been a huge part of it. I looked back at some numbers when I found out about the event. And 2015 was the first year that we actually had anti-racism mentioned in our budget. It was under $1,000, but it was something. And I also looked back at some numbers from that time, and we really only had about 4 lay people involved. And we did call it a team at that time. 4 people kind of, they would kind of come in and out. But that was mostly where we were at. And in 2016, January, we had adopted a continuing resolution as an amendment to our Constitution to codify that we wanted our staff and pastors and leaders to take part in the 2.5-day training and other things like that. And so those were just a couple of the historical pieces. And then if you flash forward to now, we're at a situation where we're no longer relying on just 1 or 2 individuals' energy to keep this going, which had been the case in the past. And now we have 4 people who are officially come forward and said, I'll be a facilitator. I want to help keep this going. And we usually have, I think, 10 or 12 or more people now coming to every ministry thing, which is, and we meet monthly. We have at the exact same time every month, so everybody knows where to find us. And those kind of things have just been really a blessing to have so many people want to get and stay involved. There were a couple other partnerships that I thought were important. Was we've had a lot of opportunities to learn from others and to journey with others. And one of the key parts for us, I think, has been Lenny Duncan. You know, very shortly after June of 2015 and the massacre of the Immanuel 9, he was part of a video that the ELCA did. It was a two-part thing that we watched after that. And then he also put out 3 videos of his own that we really, I think, you know, we kind of soaked up anything that he put out. And that has been a big part of the last few years for us, is learning from his perspective and others. And we went to his, I think we had 12 people maybe at his book signing at St. Luke's, right? So, and then he was part of forming what was called the Emmaus Collective, which was an online listing of churches who were doing the work of anti-racism, who had identified themselves and saying, we want people to know that we don't have all the answers, we haven't solved this, but we are, we want to be part of you know, an effort and a collective that has since kind of taken a back seat. But I think it was an important step that we took that opportunity. And then the other thing, Carrie, if you'd like to talk, I don't think we talked very much at all about the Lighthouse Foundation in your intro, but that's been a really key partnership that we have had come along, and we've joined it and just really benefited from that experience. So
I'll jump in and say a little bit about Lighthouse. Excuse me. Lighthouse Foundation was the foundation was formed 2 years ago, just about 2 years ago. It grew out of Lighthouse Church, which is a non-denominational church that caters to and supports Black LGBTQ folks. The foundation was formed because they went to a lot of the members of the church went to the pastor and said, we're suffering. We're being abused and mistreated in our own neighborhood, i.e. Boys Town and the surrounding, and it's got to stop. And so the foundation was formed to fight against that. Why is it a good partnership for us at Holy Trinity? We have a long-standing history of supporting and fighting for LGBTQ rights, and both within the church and all that, but also in the greater society. This foundation marries the two, anti-racism and LGBTQ issues. So it's an intersectional thing that's like a perfect fit for us, because it encompasses so much of what we do in our work at the church. It is an important piece. We have joined in it both representationally and financially. We support them. We just upped some of that support recently. So we said to them, in effect, we're even more with you than we first signed up, which is an excellent thing for us to do. And a lot of the action in terms of going out in the street and protest initially, that's what the Lighthouse was doing. Some of us, John included, were along for some of that. But you know, we have partner places to do these types of things. But the important thing is that our ministry expands to incorporate something like this, so that we are more in the world of it, and being partner with an entire Black-oriented group informs what we do in our work. It gives us a better lens, a better look through the lens, as Yvonne was talking about, so that we can come back with what we need to do and move forward with that. So yeah, it's a huge partnership. And you know, anybody can join. Anybody else wants to look up Lighthouse Foundation and get involved with it, you should. It's a tremendous organization, and we need all the help we can get. But yeah, it's a highlight partnership in our anti-racism work, and it's very important for our church as a whole.
Did Susan or Jamie want to jump in with anything before we sign off?
Say just one quick thing. one thing that was interesting, I think, for my husband and I, that we joined Holy Trinity, we've been looking for a church for about a year, and had attended a few, and nothing was kind of like resonating, and we ended up finding Holy Trinity just before the pandemic. So we've actually never been in the church, which I think is still interesting. But a lot of the things that people are talking about, I just want to reiterate from like kind of a newcomer's perspective. Like, it was the welcome statement on the website. It was like the books chosen in book club that reflected a lot of this like work that people are talking about. We actually submitted, we actually talked to Pastor Craig after Pastor Jamie from Lighthouse was a guest pastor at Holy Trinity. It was after that session that we were like, this is kind of, I think, the church that we want to be at. And so it's exciting to be in this space. And I just also want to it is tough work doing all of this virtually. It's tough work, period. But it's also just hard to create a sense of community online. And I think a lot of people are doing this really well. And so I just want to say thank you for that too, as a new person.
I'm fine. You can go on.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the Holy Trinity team about discernment and formation, your journey where you are today? Anything else you want to make sure that people here today hear, particularly for the First Immanuel community, as well as maybe in the very early steps, or even just a very gaining educational sort of material about what anti-racism work is and how that could be present in a worshiping community?
I guess what I would say is that we are eager to collaborate is what I wanted to say. Is like we do this work with Holy Family Lutheran Church every Lent when we read a book together. So as Holy Trinity is a predominantly white congregation, we realize like doing this work in kind of a white bubble, like doing our own work is important, but we also need to be like having these conversations beyond the Holy Trinity community. And so to the First Immanuel community, we are open to, I mean, being such close neighbors there in the loop too, like we can facilitate and continue to look at what could be if we want to do a conversation series together, or do some work together, you know, like do some action together, whatever it might be. We are open to the possibilities and would love to start that conversation.
Hi, with that, Kyle, that's St. Luke's. We're in the same boat. We're always looking for collaborators. And if you want to join us in one of our actions, you're welcome to come.
Another thing, I think, I'm not sure if we mentioned, but we also have a couple of members of another Pebble who for many years have been key to building what we are, you know, carrying forward. And so it's a uniqueness between St. Luke's and our church, I think, that we have these people who are working on all these different levels within the church to really carry it forward. And so that's just one more example of how valuable that partnership and those leaders have been.
Well, thank you so much for raising up those partnerships and collaborations. And I want to transition. If there was anything that you all heard between yourselves that you wanted to make a note on or ask a question to in this collaborative space, I just want to give you a couple of seconds if you wanted to follow up while you had the other person on a box in Zoom.
It's kind of cheating because we talk to each other all the time. But
oh, okay.
Yeah, we do.
But I do want to add, because I know you've heard, especially the Holy Trinity team, talk about the covenant a few times. And I don't know if you guys know what, when you hear the word covenant, what we're all talking about is that a couple of years ago, the Synod's Antiracism Ministry of the Pebble approached a few congregations about entering into a covenantal relationship to develop more discernment around anti-racism. Holy Trinity and St. Luke's were two of those congregations. So those congregations are still in a covenantal relationship. And part of that relationship is not just between those congregations and the Synod team, it's also across the congregations. So when Ben was talking about some of these relationships, Holy Trinity, St. Luke's, I forgot the other ones, Wicker Park, Good Shepherd and Oak Park, all of those congregations have had some conversation amongst each other because they're all doing the work intentionally about how they can help each other out on this journey.
Thank you for that. And that's something I hope First Immanuel noted. If this is something to discern, there's this covenantal relationship with the synod-wide group. There was one message from John from the Holy Trinity team over. Was that supposed to be for the St. Luke's team, John? Oh, I'm sorry, that's John Taylor. Is that? Okay, we'll come back to that when we get to the, or John, are you with one of the anti-racism teams?
I am not.
Okay, if you
I am
mind. Okay, can I hold your question for one of our first ones
That's
when we
fine,
get
sure,
to the Q&A?
yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So now I want to just turn it over. I haven't done this work alone here at First Immanuel. I wanted to open up to two other members of my team, either Paulette and Carol, if they had any questions for the group to get kind of our Q&A started as members of First Immanuel hearing this presentation.
I'll start. This is Carol, and so as I was listening to your presentations, I was trying to reflect on our own situation and what we could learn from you. And one thing that you both mentioned that there's been pushback, and I'm wondering how you deal with or how you handle not making the members who are not actively involved in these ministries feel as though if you're not with us, you're against us. Because even though we can agree on our values, we don't always agree on the appropriate methods for living out those values. And he said, some people feel as though there's too much time, there's too much focus on this. How do you assuage their concerns without alienating them?
You're asking for the really silver. What's it called? I don't know, Ben. It looked like you were going to say something. I'll let you answer that one.
I'll say something about it because this is something that I've been directly involved with. We've had resistance in a number of different ways. And I said earlier, it was often about, we're presenting something and people say we shouldn't be doing it. One specific thing I know where we received a letter from a congregant where it had all these reasons of why it wasn't what we should be doing. And my response was to that person and to all of them, come and be part of the conversation. Don't separate yourself. Bring those objections, bring your point of view to the conversation. We may not necessarily change the mind, but if we don't have the opportunity to openly discuss it back and forth, we know nothing's going to change. So I always invite the dissenters to come and be part of the conversation. And it has happened on times where people have come and done that and go, oh, I was wrong. No, I'm changing. So it can happen, but it has to be, there's a difference between call out and call in. It has to be a call in rather than a call out. It has to be an invitation to join rather than any type of actions, words that further the separation.
I think we're also trying to get better at being hospitable and empathetic to people wherever they are on their journey, right? To not, when we talk about anti-racism work, we often talk about the spectrum of where you're at on the, are you a 5, are you a 1 kind of thing, and realizing nobody's on the same level on that spectrum. And so one of the ways in which I think we try to be clear with folks that this isn't just going to be an echo chamber of the same kind of thought, or we're not going to I don't know. We will definitely have standards for language that we want to uphold so that nobody's being traumatized or hurt by what somebody's saying. But we do also want to invite people into a brave space. So I actually put in the chat our invitation to Brave Space that was written by Mickey Scape Jones. And we say this at the beginning of every one of our anti-racism ministry meetings, just to reiterate that, like, this isn't going to be a perfect thing. People will often say something that might be a little bit cringy or just hard to hear in the midst of this work that we're doing, but it's all part of the process of really trying to, like, learn how to move forward together, and that's not always clean and easy. It's a lot of murkiness and uncomfortable moments, but as brave as we can be is what we're inviting people to be.
I also have a couple on that one, because I've had the fortune of being able to work with a few congregations in our synod on anti-racism, so I've seen very different takes on this. The first thing I'll say is I've had more than one congregation tell me that we shouldn't be doing this because it's political work, and we don't do politics in church. And I tell them that is a political decision. Not to do anti-racism work is a decision. I mean, it's like, so, and since when hasn't the church done politics? That's part of from the beginning of time. The other piece is that similar to what Ben, I always try to let people know that I'm very open to hearing their concerns, their pushback. I do not go into an event, for example, when I'm doing a workshop, one of the first things I tell folks, I'm not coming into this assuming that you're all going to agree with me. But I do want to know what your disagreement is so we can at least know what disagreeing about. By the same token, I am completely unapologetic about this. I am an anti-racist organizer. You know that when I'm coming in the door. So I also happen to be a Latino male raised in the US. I bring that baggage to the table also. If you don't want to hear it, you don't want to talk to me. So you know what I'm bringing to the table. And like I said earlier, when we're doing this, there is going to be some friction. There will be some people who get upset. We may lose some people. That is their choice.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Carol. And I think Paulette also had a question for the group before we turn it over to the larger audience.
Thank you. Please speak of this in corporate America and this being a business imperative. I'm in education now. I've been in corporate America all my life. My question would be, why does this need to start in the church and not simply other aspects of society?
I only heard part of that question. Why is this in the church? I didn't hear the whole question.
I think Paulette is transitioning to our other space. She is here at the church with us. Okay. So I'll give her, oh, I'm getting a 1 second from Pastor Harry.
Okay.
Here she is.
My track skills, thank you. My question is, why does this have to happen in our church? Why does this have to start as a business imperative? And you know, we speak of it in corporate space and we frame it as diversity and inclusion. We speak of it in education. My question is, why does this need to happen now in our church? Why is it imperative that we start the conversation in our church as part of, as well as other sectors of society?
A really great question. I think that obviously there are things in our world right now and have been that have gone unrecognized in the church and have been maybe ignored for the sake of comfort or appeasing certain people. And I think we are well past due time to bring some of these uncomfortable realities to people. And if we're not speaking a word of truth and life and grace and peace into those realities that we look at when we see the pain and brokenness in our world, then I think we are not speaking a gospel to the real realities of our world right now that need to be addressed. And so I think the time is now, but the time was then. We just weren't doing it in the same way. And I think we now have new language, new awareness. There has been a real pivot, I think, racially. There's been an awakening, I think, especially in this past year with George Floyd and now with this new reality that police officers can actually be convicted of charges rather than acquitted. And so we might be seeing some a turning right now, and I think the church needs to be a part of that. We need to be speaking this language and translating it through the lens of grace and Christ and all the things that we know to be life-giving and good. So that's I think the best I could say.
And I will say, this is not something that our church just started doing. The ELCA has been doing this since the beginning, not always well, but at least trying. So it's not new. To add on to that, I mean, I always, people ask me why I do anti-racism work in the church, and it's because I feel called to do it. As a Christian, this is part of what I have to do. And I will frame it as have to do. It's not a must or a want, I have to do it. And that's, to me, that's what our church is called to do. And if it takes me pushing on the church, then I'll push on the church.
I agree. And if not you, then who?
That's correct. It's got to start somewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Grant. From my perspective, I think, the first thing comes to mind is that, because the Lutheran Church has been, culpable historically in racism. And I think, which is one of the things that, we've spent some time at St. Luke's talking about. And, so I think there's that whole perspective. And then I think, apart from that, I think it's look at it as, evaluating, the institutions in which, racism persists. And I think, the church is a huge part of that. And I think, it also then lends itself to, to doing work, in other aspects of life as well, education and, for, in my example, my day job as well. So I think it all kind of, I think there's also kind of a cross-pollination of ideas that can happen that way. And I know that I've learned a lot, I think, by being a part of conversations along these lines in different facets of life too. And I couldn't get myself off mute before for the previous question, but I just wanted to, I wanted to mention too that, I think sometimes when these, in terms of resistance, I think kind of along the lines of what was already said, but I think, even for example, Lenny Duncan, we spent some time at St. Luke's talking about some of his posts. And I think we also acknowledge that there are folks, that are members of our congregation that, that work day to day in the ELCA. And I think, there is a, naturally you could assume that maybe there would be a sensitivity to talking, but I think, I think we found that it was really important to just have that conversation. And I think it's a good lesson to understand by having a conversation, you can really kind of pinpoint, well, why is something that's being said uncomfortable to me? What objection do I have to it, and why? And I think it's kind of feeds into that whole, idea of really really reflecting, I think, on a deep level. So even if there is disagreement, I think, again, I think bringing it inward, and being inclusive, can be really helpful. So, and actually one other thing, just, in terms of resistance, I've gotten the impression, I think at St. Luke's, that, I don't necessarily see, resistance maybe in more overt types of ways. I think one could question, sometimes if you think about, who is it that's showing up, to these gatherings and who's not. I think Yvonne and I have also talked about, what does it mean if you're not showing up? Is that, that in itself could be termed that is resistance in and of itself. But I think that also requires more, more investigation. Are people not showing up because they're part of other ministries or other committees? I know for myself, I'm not necessarily as involved in other ministries or committees at St. Luke's, just from a sake of time. But I think that requires some real thinking. Is it because people are too, pressed for time, or is there something else deeper than that? And I think that's really, just important to think about.
It's something that I just thought about related to what we're talking about. Why do this in the church? Both Holy Trinity and St. Luke's, as well as Good Shepherd and Wicker Park and some of the other congregations that are doing this work, part of what all these congregations have done is that we've made it a very intentional process, so that people are aware in the pews, this is the work of our church, we're doing this. And part of that was all of these congregations kicked off this work formally in worship by doing an affirmation of faith related to anti-racism work and calling the entire congregation into this work. And I think that's key as we're talking about why do this as church. It's part of who we are as Christians. So we have to be intentional about that, even to the point of bringing it into worship.
That's why we're here.
Amen. Amen. So we have about just shy of 10 minutes. I'm not going to keep our speakers past 2 o'clock by any means. There were a couple questions that were in the chat previously, so I want to return to those. I want to give Pastor Emily Heitzman, did you want to voice either of the questions that you put in there before?
Hello. Yeah, well, so now I'm trying to remember which ones all I put in there. So thank you everybody for this. And I did want to know if there was a first of all, I think one of the things was to who we might reach out to if our congregations were interested in that covenant relationship. Okay, good. Okay, great. Email best if you don't, or if you want to put that
Email's
in
the quickest. You're going to get that as the quickest response if you email me. Yes.
Okay. Do you mind putting that in the chat? That would be great. And then the other question was, and now I'm trying to remember who, I think it was St. Luke's, was working on the land acknowledgement had the land acknowledgement working group. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would there be somebody to talk, to connect with, to just hear from the working group on a little bit more in depth on that process? I know you mentioned a little bit about it, but I would love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm sure, Grant, I don't know if you agree. We can take that back to the folks who are working that. I'm sure they'd be glad to talk to other folks about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would expect that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Emily. And John Taylor had a question in the chat.
Yeah, so I'm part of Diaconia, and I have been for 3 years now. And Diaconia, every service ends with go out and serve. So Diaconia is a training program. It goes on for about 18 months, spread over 2 years. And it's theological training, it's biblical training, it's stuff that gives us strength on how to do exactly that, how to serve better. So I've heard that I've only been in it, I've been in it for 3 years, and there's churches in the suburbs, churches in the city that do this. So have you been approached by Diaconia within the Synod? It's Synod organized to basically do an anti-racism 5-week workshop.
So I can actually speak to that because I have had a few meetings with Marsha Smith about this.
He's the one who wanted to get on today.
Excuse me. So Marsha from Diaconia and I have spoken a few times, and there was a couple other folks in the Diaconia team that have spoken about putting together a curriculum for Diaconia around anti-racism. The idea would be that this would be not part of the 3-year cycle, but a kind of like a graduate thing where you would have an extra module about how to incorporate anti-racism into the Diaconia work once you've graduated. That's currently on pause right now because the synodical ministry is under reorganization. So as we work through that reorganization, that was paused momentarily. Once we finish the reorganization, my expectation is that we'll revisit that again. But we have had actually some significant conversations down to the point of even outlining what the curriculum would involve, how long be, how many sessions, who would do the training. So we've gotten pretty far along. So I would expect that at some point in the near future, something will come. I don't know what it is yet, but it's coming.
Okay, great. Good to hear that.
Yep.
Awesome. And I believe Sarah Trum had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was just curious about how often you said something, I think, to the effect that the two congregations, some of the leadership meet regularly and talk about these things regularly. And I'm wondering about how often that happens and part of the other congregations that you mentioned that were a part of the collaborative in the Metro Chicago Synod.
Synod has gotten together several different times, and that's been less so during COVID, but just before COVID, we were meeting usually about quarterly in different events that were happening in different spaces in the Synod, and just having those opportunities to share knowledge, share energy, what's working, challenges, things that we really need other people to process with. And like I said, so many of our ideas at Holy Trinity have come from St. Luke's, and I think that overlap and leadership we've had with Yvonne has been crucial for some of that to be shared as well. Is that we have team members that go and leaders that are part of both ministries, and people at the Synod level with another Pebble. So just kind of getting in touch with that network just kind of brings you into a natural sharing of ideas and energy.
I wanted to add to that. I mean, just somebody at Holy Trinity said that they hired, they called an activist pastor. Well, we did the thing in St. Luke's, and the two pastors happen to know each other and spend time together. So some of that happens, some of that sharing happens that way. The other is, Bennett just alluded to it. I actually attend the meetings for both Holy Trinity and St. Luke's. So I tend to be a conduit to bring it across both. Because just as Ben says that Holy Trinity has learned from St. Luke's, we've definitely learned from Holy Trinity also, even to the fact that we're using their poem, the welcome, the embrace-based one.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. Yeah. And even though I'm not a part of, any those sort of direct conversations, I know that, since I'm part of another Pebble, we also, pretty much every month at a synodical level, we talk about what we're doing in those congregations. So I think, yeah, there's been a lot of, information shared that way, to the benefit of all of us.
All right, I didn't have any questions in the chat. If there was a 1-minute question, we could probably get that in. Anyone, especially from the First Immanuel community, have any more questions? Did I see your hand go up, Pastor Harry, or was that something else?
No, something else.
Okay.
All good.
It doesn't seem like this is a short thing, but just I'm guessing there's something that needs to be acknowledged about the fact that so much of our Lutheran leadership is white and in these congregations. And so like, just I'm thinking about how to bring people of color in, not to do the work for us, but to be, you know, helping us reflect on what we're doing and how we're doing it, and you know, that kind of thing. So I don't know if there's any comment on that.
So I actually thought and talked about this before. So so a couple of things, because I've had congregations be concerned about doing anti-racism work, and we're going to become this big diverse congregation all of a sudden. And I'm going to answer this in two steps. First step is that doing anti-racism work doesn't mean that all of us are going to get a bunch of Latinos in your pews. If I want to go to your congregation, I'll go to your congregation. I have my own congregation. So that's the first one, because people always ask me about that. Well, how do we get so many more people of color in the pews? That's not the objective. The objective is to become a more equitable church. The piece is that if you are, and most of our congregations are, a primarily white congregation, look for community organizations in your area that are led by people of color, and look for partnerships where you can work together and learn from each other. That's a way to diversify your perspectives without having to necessarily bring everybody into your congregation.
Okay, and I think we'll have that be our concluding response. I would just invite everyone here, if we could, just to show some thanks and appreciation for all of the time of Pastor Ben and Grant and Carrie and all the other members of the Holy Trinity team for being here, sharing their wisdom and insight and journey. Thank you all for your dedication to this work. I know it is difficult and takes a lot of energy, so I thank you and I appreciate you for what you're trying to do to make our church and our society a more just and equitable place for all people. And really appreciate your time today. Thanks for following up with me. For everyone, also a big thank you, shout out to the First Immanuel team, the Civil Rights That Are Now group, and that is, we had Carol and Paulette who had asked questions before, Josh Dunlop's here on the screen, and a couple of people who couldn't make it, Harrison and Alvar today, as well as myself, and Pastor Harry's been helping to guide us. So thank you all immensely for the work that you've done to make this event possible. And if you wouldn't mind filling out the survey that's in the chat. Otherwise, I just invite you to go in peace, carry this with you, and continue to serve the Lord in as many ways as you are called and invited to. But thank you so much for all you've shared today, and everyone for being here. So.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.